All right, here's Unit 5, first lesson, Manifest Destiny 2.0, expanding into the West. Causes behind imperialism, effects, a little bit later on. Complete this map. It's just a mapping activity. You'll see them up here, numbers, letters. Go ahead and write in the oceans. No spots for them. Go ahead and draw them in. Going back in time, expansion of the West in maps. I see the same map is on my wall at the front of the room. We need to start back at 1607 with Jamestown, the first English colony, right about in here. And we're going to have this westward expansion going on for the English until 1890 when the frontier is gone. Manifest Destiny wasn't coined as a phrase early on, but there was always this push moving into the West, whether we were colonies or not. And the notion of settling it as an entire country doesn't come until the post-Revolutionary War time period. One thing we really got to know here is, as a new nation, what is our mindset? Because imperialism involves foreign policy. We've got to understand this foreign policy. 1797, George Washington goes back to the farm. He's done with 8 years as being president, and he says to the nation in a published farewell address, "Steer clear of all foreign alliances." Read the quote. And the great rule of conduct for us in regarding foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations, trade, to have with them as little, them meaning the Europeans, connection as possible. They're in wars all the time. They're going to get us in trouble. We're a very weak and poor, economically problematic country at the time. Focus on the West, put the blinders on, stay out of European affairs. If we get another war, we could risk what we just gained in Revolutionary War. So let's go move into the West. We start moving into the West. We get to the 18-teens, into the 1800s, and we expand with the Louisiana Purchase under Thomas Jefferson. Remember the Federalist, Democratic, Republican debate of some of the issues they had there with government and that kind of thing. In the early years of the presidencies, the first administrations, we get a Florida land purchase agreement in 1890, expanding into the South a little bit as well. By the time we get to 1820, the country has come up to the Mississippi River, and there's the issue of the expansion of slavery, if you remember, and the growing of cotton and the Missouri Compromise here happening, as well as a big economic depression and panic, and that causes people to want to move further west to find better opportunities. There's a strong competition between identities here between the northern section and the southern section, and the slavery issue has reared its head, but with some treaties settling some borders out in the west between the Spanish and the British up in the north, things are settling down a little bit for us. But in the South, in Latin America, the Caribbean and South America, and Mexico, we have to really understand what's going on here because it's central to this entire unit. By 1820, Spain was losing control of most of its colonies and its empire in the Americas. Independence spreads, and the ideas of independence spread into this region, and Mexico becomes independent at about this point in time, and so do multiple other countries. And George Washington type people help other countries become independent in Central and South America, and Spain is losing control of most of those regions. They're poor, they're unstable like us, and we're concerned that Europeans might come in and take over those particular places and seek to advance and take what Spain had. And those particular countries, France, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Prussia, don't have as much as the other European powers or England have, and England could possibly be a threat in all this as well. And so there were actually discussions amongst some of those countries to retake some of those places. But President Monroe in 1823 made a statement, a foreign policy statement, adding to, and please don't forget, and I think I forgot to mention it, that the key word here for us in foreign policy is isolate. Don't forget that word, isolate. He gives off this foreign policy statement known as the Monroe Doctrine, and it basically says European countries, you see it in the cartoon, from here on, this America's place is ours. Don't expect to try and expand here. Spain still has a few locations. England, France, many countries have locations in the Caribbean, i.e. Cuba is still part of the Spanish Empire. They still have that. It's a super important sugar bowl, big money maker for them, but this becomes another layer on top of isolationism, and it still is today a centerpiece of foreign policy in the Americas for the United States. So we draw a line in the sand, and this is our region, our interest, not yours. So we can continue to expand into the West. Panic in 1830. In the 1830s, causes people to move west even further. There's a tariff issue between northern and southern states, and that almost brings secession. Texas becomes independent in 1836 because lots of Southern Americans especially were moving into that particular place and didn't like how the Mexican government was controlling their lives and banning slavery for that matter. And by the time we get to the election of 1840, there's this movement called the Second Great Awakening we talked about, and reform movements, and there is a movement against slavery and abolitionism because slavery is expanding and growing amongst other issues that people want to reform, but slavery is becoming the #1 thing. And in the election of 1840, this expansionist president gets elected. 1844, this expansionist president gets elected by the name of James K. Polk, and he is a Democratic Republican, a Southerner, and he wants to expand significantly because there is a feeling that in the South we need to expand. Again, there's a competition, North or South, states, free states, slave states, and the United States Senate. We need more land for Westerners. The Manifest Destiny gets coined here with the debate over whether or not we should expand into the West. It's our destiny to do so. But Texas has a problem. It's two problems. It's a slave particular republic, and if it becomes a slave state, then that throws off the balance in northern and southern states. Well, Manifest Destiny, the debate happens, and the previous president actually makes it happen. In 1844, before James Polk becomes president, Tyler helps get Congress to pass a resolution to do so, and soon after, Florida comes into the Union also as another slave state. And with this, Mr. Polk, as president, seeks to continue to expand west and annex, and once we have annexed Texas, then there is this issue that Texas has #2 issue, and that is the dispute of the border where Mexico begins and Texas ends, and it brings about the Mexican-American War. We win the Mexican-American War, we get into the war, and there's a debate over whether slavery should expand there or not. The Wilmot Proviso, if you remember, said that there shouldn't be a northern provision, shouldn't be slavery out in the West. Gets the Southerners all whipped up and worked up, but we win the war, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed, and we get all of this territory, the Mexican cession, on top of Texas, including California. And that, of course, brings in issues of whether California and or Texas should be free. And the slavery issue is reignited with this western expansion and new territory. California wants to become a state, and it does so because there's a massive gold rush and population boom there, but it does so only because of the Compromise of 1850, Free California, big debate, Fugitive Slave Act. Northerners have to help bring back runaway slaves into the South. Northerners very irritated about that, and popular sovereignty rules out in these territories. Uncle Tom's Cabin, his book, is written about the particular condition of slaves in the South, and the sentiments and anger and irritation over slavery increases, yet debate and discussion over how to connect the East and the West is going on pretty strongly at this time, and that means the Transcontinental Railroad. Southerners say it has to be in the South because it's flatter there, fewer mountains in the North, and so we buy this extra piece of land down here called the Gadsden Purchase. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is an attempt by Northerners to get a railroad there, particularly little Stephen Douglas, a senator from Illinois, get that railroad from Illinois to California so that it can expand and grow the economy in the North there, and he can become president someday. And it results then also in popular sovereignty expanding into the northern reaches of the North, which causes the Compromise of 1850 to basically fall apart. Our line, remember to draw a line here, 3630, where slavery wasn't supposed to be in the North anymore. It's gone, and now slavery can be in the North, and a Republican Party explodes onto the scene and says, we got to get rid of that. And here we go toward the Civil War. Austin Manifesto was found out, a little secret plan to buy Cuba by Southerners, and a Southern president supporting it. And that was to expand what in the South seemed to be opportunities for slavery, even though they felt that they had not gotten a very fair shake in other compromises out in the West. And if Cuba wasn't going to be sold by Spain, we would go to war, and that caused Northerners to go kind of crazy there. So the Manifest Destiny is raging the slave issue. Now, in the 1850s, even though Mr. Washington said isolate, we're starting to think outside our little walls in our North American territory here, and that is because we have California. Let's get to Asia. And President Millard Fillmore sends a guy by the name of Matthew Perry and an American naval force to Japan to try and break into Japan, not literally, but to ask for, with muscles flexed, cannons and big warships flexed, to allow us to have coaling stations to trade with the rest of Asia to grow the economy of the United States. And we do that and have access to that particular place. It's the first time Japan opened up to any Western power, and this happens in the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854. Continuing to the west, in the 1860s, while the war is going on, we're still expanding west. We've got massive federal government programs. Remember the first two here, super important. The Industrial Revolution is going to be sparked by that Civil War, and it ends in 1865. Our Reconstruction rages on into the 1870s, ending in 1877. But in those 1860s, we gain more territory. We have still our eyes open for opportunity to buy land. Russia can't keep it anymore. They sell it to us for a measly amount of money, and it was considered to be Seward's folly. There's Seward, and there's President Andrew Johnson. White men alone rule the South, remember, is the guy that helps push it through, and we are expanding yet a little bit more. So Manifest Destiny, this painting we looked at before, really painted in 1872 after the Civil War, but it had been going on before. It's wide open, feeding and fueling the American economy. The Industrial Revolution is a big part of what's going on here with our Manifest Destiny and our road to a war coming up in Lesson 2. In the 1870s, you can see the West is pretty well divided up and has lines drawn all over it with labels with territories and states. There's economic panic. Remember, this is the time period of the Grange and the Farm Alliances growing and advancing. Reconstruction ends in that particular decade, 1877, and by the time we get into the late 1880s, the last little piece of land, which was supposed to be for Native Americans only, is opened up in this literally great big huge race, allowing whites to come in and claim with a flag a piece of land. And with all this, again, I've got the Grangers and the Farm Alliances growing in size and number because of the farm stress and the economic stress. The silver issue is going on 16-1 and all that kind of thing. So by the time we've got this decade of 1890 arriving, the United States Census, U.S. government says that the frontier is dead, it's gone, and now there's a bit of concern for generations. It's always been there, opportunity for western land expansion. Now it isn't. What do we do now? If we're not expanding, perhaps we are going to shrink. And signs of shrinkage, and this is expand or shrink here if you want to fill that in, signs of shrinkage are going to occur, and it causes panic amongst industry, business, and businessmen and politicians. So what are the causes and forces behind imperialism and expansionism? You see the two together, you've got to think of this time period, 1890, end of the frontier. So the end of the frontier is announced in 1890. The Oklahoma Land Rush is the event that kind of caps it off and says that's it. There is no more. There is in our system the constant demand for raw materials and resources. Remember, the 1890s were a time of serious strikes and labor violence and things of that nature. And if we don't feed those workers, we are going to have some serious problems and issues, which we do in the 1890s. So the Panic of 1893 was a sign that we're going backwards. We're shrinking. We need new markets to sell gadgets, wedges, and thingamajigs to. We have an overproduction of goods. We have too many workers. And this leading up to, and remember, this is the time of the Grangers and the farm movement and the farm alliances, and William Jennings Bryan, the Populist Party, is formed here, saying we need to have government do something about the issues of farmers, but big business, Republican McKinley here, standing on the gold coin. Remember the monetary issue. We're going to bring you prosperity, commerce, and civilization into the West. And the West was always kind of seen as a safety valve for populations in the East. But these labor strikes and stress, economic stress of the 1890s, sent a message that we have to expand somehow, some way. And we got to expand outside our borders. And when we do that, we're going to run into other native peoples or people of other cultures and other countries. And we've been through that experience before. We've had that in our mindset and in our practice before, subjugating other people for economic resources and material gain through political force and military force. All right. Second reason why there is this imperialism, the cause of imperialism, is because of the Industrial Revolution. And because our trade is not just buying and selling stuff to Americans anymore, it's because we're selling stuff to people around the world, increasingly and making our money there. And so we are looking to expand our influence and opportunities to sell stuff worldwide. Look at the thing called the Singer sewing machine, a very simple thing. It was an international company. All kinds of other businesses were becoming more international, connected to sales overseas. Number three reason is competition with Europe. You've been through this in your world history class before, when the Europeans were kind of driven out of the Americas over time. Spain most recently, they start looking at other places and they start partitioning places like Africa, and Europeans control 84% of the world by 1914. Some other countries were a little bit behind, but the United States is really behind. We don't have anything, and so we're really panicking that the bowl of chocolate is going away or there's nothing left in the bowl. So what do? How do we keep up with the European powers and be like a great European power if there's nothing left to have? Well, you look for an opportunity, which is a war coming up in the Spanish-American War, right? And here you can kind of see in this cartoon as well, Russia, Britain, and Germany carving up the rest of Africa, and also, if you remember from world history, carving up and a partitioning of China as well, right? Queen Elizabeth, Kaiser Wilhelm, Tsar Nicholas of Russia, Japan becoming a world power at this time. Also, if you've ever seen the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai, that's set in this time period, and China is on the outside and really doesn't have a lot to say at the table. And as an example of that most predominant power, and mommy and daddy basically having the largest empire in the world, they still do by 1937. Even in 1937, the sun is always on some part of territory or land that they own or control, which is feeding the British industrial machine and economy. And how do you keep control and protection over that? Well, you have to have something very specifically important to do that. You have to have bases. Notice what Britain has all over the place, and you have to have ships. And this is where we get into ideology. The most important person you really need to know, and this guy you've got to know, Alfred Thayer Mahan, a U.S. naval officer and philosopher, ideologist, wrote several publications, one of them being The Influence of Sea Power Upon History from 1660 to 1783. He wrote this in 1890 when the census said the frontier is gone. He says the naval power is the key to world dominance and protected trade. Every empire on the planet in world history has always had a strong navy. The Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, and that navy feeds the economic system, buying and selling of goods. And prominent politicians, businessmen, and industrialists read this. Even people in Europe read this, and there becomes this massive naval buildup in the United States and in other countries. And we start seeking opportunities for bases for ourselves to feed our economic system. And it's all about refueling or coaling stations, places where coal can be thrown on these ships and you can get things back and forth. And Teddy Roosevelt, the super patriot of America at the time and future president, and president in 1907, painted some of those ships white and sailed them around the world to let everybody know that we are here and have arrived. And what we have at that time, which is the results of the Spanish-American War, some new territories out into Asia, you'll get that in lesson 2, we can protect them, don't mess with us. So here's what he wrote. Make sure you read it and answer the questions there. And this is going to be the ultimate result of our expansionist event in the Spanish-American War coming up in lesson 2. Other things that help promote expansionism and imperialism. Social Darwinism comes up again. Survival of the fittest. Some are strong, some are weak. That's the way of the world. We are strong. We're Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and we're a capitalist country, and we have one of the most dominant societies and economies in the world, and that's because that's the way things are, and nature has made us that way. And so we have the right to take over particular places and advance our democracy, advance our way of life, and it's better for other people. The other factor, you got to know this also, is yellow journalism, promoted by these two individual newspaper owners in New York, Pulitzer and Hearst, and they would love nothing better than have a good story to make money. They're expansionists. They're in competition with each other to have the largest number of papers sold in the United States, and they print all kinds of things to get people to support the war going to war against Spain coming up in lesson 2. Within that, there's all kinds of jingoism woven in there, and that is basically extreme messages of extreme beliefs of nationality and supremacy, and we're better than you, and everybody else is lesser than. There's a drumbeat of war always going on in their messaging, enthusiastic support and glorification of war in order to advance the mother country, all that kind of thing. And quite often it's just flat, straight out lies in all of this. And yellow journalism, if you look at the examples of it that sometimes you see in grocery stores, for example, and publications like World News, and some of those types of magazines, you see all kinds of crazy stuff like this, and you know that it's not real, but you've got to look at it, or some people just buy it. And so today we might call it fake news, like blatantly fake. Today, sometimes it's hard to tell. Dick Cheney, former vice president under George Bush during the early days of the war on terror. He's a robot. Another example, Hillary Clinton adopts an alien baby. This is not true, but people pay attention to it. They look at it. When it comes to the Spanish-American War, these papers print things to get people who want to go to war and support war when normally they probably wouldn't. Number 4, ideology is the white man's burden. You've seen this in world history class as well. We're going to do just like mommy and daddy did. We're going to put these people on our back because it's our duty. It's our Christian duty to do so. They don't look very enthused about it, but that's okay. They don't know what they need and don't know what they want, and we're going to take on the burden as an advanced society and get them to civilization and the promised land and a better life. Right? And it's promoted in media and in magazines all over the place. You've perhaps seen this before in your world history class. Read the fine print here. Soap, Pear soap. We bring cleanliness. Here's a missionary. Here's an indigenous person. We bring cleanliness to the dark places of the earth, just like the Manifest Destiny cartoon, right? Or painting, rather, I should say, right? Light, civilization into darkness, and we clean them. They're dirty people. They're dirty cultures. They need to advance. They need to be cleaned up. So your left side here for this lesson is only work on this snap chart, finish that off, get ready for and complete your video cast on the Spanish-American War, and we'll quiz on this and the Spanish-American War next class. Good day. Make the hay.